welcome once again to EWTN's Bookmark. I'm Doug Keck. This is a very special one when I get to interview our well-known host on EWTN, the one and only Raymond Arroyo. Latest book, The Thief Who Stole Heaven, a legend, published by Sophia Institute Press, available naturally through the EWTN Religious Catalog, EWTNRC.com for all things Catholic, and also Mother Angelica. Great to see you.
Great to see you, Doug. Good to be back.
Always a pleasure. Obviously, people have seen you on some other programs as well, talking about this book.
Not in this way, Doug.
Not in this way and not in this venue.
That's right.
But you started with The Spider Who Saved Christmas. Now, that one took off like a really big. Were you surprised at the sales on that?
I was surprised. But, I mean, 5 weeks on the New York Times. I've never had a book sit 5 weeks on the New York Times list. So this was incredible. But it showed me there was an audience that wanted, there is an audience that wants traditional content, a story well told. They want something beautiful and something that they can share from generation to generation. Right. I don't consider these children's books. People say, oh, you're writing for children. No, no. These are family reads. These are family books. I was going to say, I mean, in going through these books, I mean, the beautiful illustrations, but also the copy. It's not, you know, a series of 3 words with a rhyme. Right. There's a story, and it's really seemed to be designed for someone to, in a sense, to read it to a child or read it to their family. That's how I wanted it to be. And look, I learned with The Spider Who Saved Christmas, people made that part of their Advent and Christmas traditions. They read it to grandkids, children, nieces, nephews, and the interplay, the things the kids saw and picked up on that the adults missed, and vice versa. That's where the story happens.
Let me ask you
so
that.
I wanted to do that
since this is just out new and The Spider was out before, did you hear any feedback on some insights that people drew from this particular book that surprised you or that informed you?
Well, it allowed them, look, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, that is a traditional, true legend. The Thief Who Stole Heaven is not really a legend. It's historical background and facts that have gotten lost. I cobbled it together, but it's really not a legend.
Because if you read some of the underlying things, there's different names and they have different stories.
But the story, like the Dismas name comes from an apocryphal gospel of Nicodemus. Okay, but the name Dismas and the story I relate here, St. Augustine writes about it, Peter Damian writes about it, Gregory the Great writes about it. There's a lot of really authenticated sources that I got this from. Because
why do you think they thought that was important?
I'll tell you why. Because we, not unlike The Spider, it's a new way into the tale, and when you enter a story from a different perspective, it sometimes casts the whole thing in a new light. If you know what happened just before they came in the door. And with Dismas, the only time we come across Dismas is when he's hanging on the cross at the end of his life. You get the very last act. Well, what was Act 2 and Act 1 like? This book will walk you through the first 2 acts of Dismas, and I was always puzzled, and it's part of the reason I think people take The Good Thief. They go, oh, The Good Thief, they put him on the shelf on Holy Saturday, and we never hear from him until next year. Part of the reason is he comes out of nowhere. He's hanging on the cross. Suddenly he's defending Jesus at this moment of crisis. And then he says, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Well, what precipitated that? And it always puzzled me a little bit. Why does he say this? And why is he so determined against his own confrere, the thief on the other side of Jesus? This story helps explain. And I think there is some historicity wrapped in the stories that grew from it in this tale, that we may have had a thief who, as a younger man, encountered Jesus, and what happened between them.
Yeah, it kind of reminded me a little bit of Ben-Hur, where there's this scene where they're at the water, you know, the Ben-Hur gets the water from our Lord when he was an adult, and even I think in King of Kings, where there's the situation with Mary, you know, the soldier comes by and realizes, how old is his son? Well, 2 years old. Where was he from? Bethlehem, you know, and the fact that he let it go because Our Lady, there was something about her that he saw, and it harkened back to a couple of those things.
But in the writings of the Church Fathers, they talk about Dismas, the thief, being kind of transfixed by this child and his mother, that he was kind of taken in by them. So the story goes, and I don't want to ruin it for everybody because you want to get the full story, but he clearly encountered grace in a way he had never up until that moment. And the way I tell the story, it's really about mercy and grace enduring to the very end. None of us are lost along the way.
Right, and that, I guess, is the thing that most people originally would take, would be the idea, maybe at the last minute as well, for the teaching Gospels to say, here's somebody who somebody would look down on, say, this person has not, there's no way they're ever going to reach salvation.
Right.
And here they are at the final moment of their existence. The Lord still has mercy.
A killer. I mean, Gregory the Great says he killed his brother, Dismas, the good thief did. He wasn't so good for a long time.
And you kind of dropped the brother in, I'm assuming.
Well, there's a picture of the brother, but
Right.
I don't mention it in the script.
Right.
You know, I'm very sensitive. It's a family book, and I want it to be a family read. So there are
Right.
things there I didn't want to get into, but there's a picture of the brother cleaning the sword, kind of an allusion to it. I mention it in the postscript, so families can figure it out and explore that territory if they want to later. But that is historical. Augustine mentions it, Gregory the Great mentions it. But I love the idea of that encounter with grace and the haunting of grace until the very end. And we often, you know, we judge people.
What do you mean by the haunting of grace?
I think grace can haunt you the same way sin can haunt you. You remember it and you can't let it go. And with this guy, he's branded and marked by that encounter with the child Jesus. In many ways, I see The Thief Who Stole Heaven as the prequel to The Spider Who Saved Christmas. It's the same family, same artist drew them, so I wanted them to overlap and feel they fit together. But he encounters this child, so he's a bridge between Christmas and Easter. And Dismas, the good thief, is the first Easter story. He is, in the words of Augustine, he's the evangelist of Calvary. It isn't the apostles, it isn't Our Lady, it isn't anyone else who announces Christ's divinity. At that moment, it's only the thief, the lowest of the low, the darkest of souls. He's the one that sees clearly in this moment to announce the truth, and he steals heaven as a result.
Right. Well, let me ask you that. Somebody would say, what do you mean he stole? I mean, it's a great title. I understand thief and the juxtaposition of stealing, but what do you mean he stole? It was a gift from our Lord, wasn't it?
Well, I liked the idea that you're continuing. He's a thief, he steals, and he saw his moment, but he does it for good. I later found out, after I titled it The Thief Who Stole Heaven, someone reminded me, Fulton Sheen named a title in his Life of Christ as a chapter, The Thief Who Stole Heaven. That was probably rattling around in the back of my head when I was coming up with the title.
Fan,
I love Fulton Sheen. The Life of Christ is one of the most beautiful literary approaches to the life of Jesus. I like the idea of the story of these tales. They're true, but they're great stories. And Sheen balanced the theological reality with the narrative strengths. I try to do that in these picture books as well.
Now, you also connect, in a sense, there's the thief and then the quote-unquote bad thief, who he's partners with or kind of working for.
His mentor, Justus, the older thief. And this is part of also the stories about Dismas, that he was abandoned as a child, he and his brother. They take up with this tribe of thieves. Justus, that's the name they give him, is the kind of chief of the thieves. And he mentors this child in the ways of crime and highway robbery and larceny. And Dismas learned his lessons well. The name Dismas is sunset or death, depending on the translation. So you get a sense of who this character is. And I came away, I had never heard these stories, Doug. I'd never heard the backstory.
What's really interesting, because you mentioned it in the back of the book and looking at it quickly, the idea of, Aramaic, in Syriac, all these different, stories, the same general concept, but that they would think he's an important person to talk about. That's... And they were able to kind of, in a sense, you took and weave those together
I've kind
into
of
this
synthesized them all.
Right,
These are various tales of Dismas and little bits and pieces, but I'd never seen it synthesized in one place and nowhere for families. And I thought, why are we depriving children the opportunity to think of this moment? Good Friday, Easter Sunday, we only sort of initiate the family into Christmas, and then Easter becomes rabbits and eggs. I wanted it to be something a little more, and I loved the idea that if this story is true, and it could be, you had someone who witnessed the child Jesus as an infant right after the Nativity, and a man who witnessed his death and walked into paradise with him. That is an amazing arc and an amazing character. Why would you lose that? And so I really my only thought was, I've got to find a way to popularize this and make it accessible for families. And I initially thought I'd do it as a short story or a novella. That's going to reach a very limited audience, and it will never get to the point where I wanted it, which is conversation.
Now you mentioned the fact of Easter eggs.
Yeah.
Now, that has another term, too. And,
Yes.
and there are some Easter eggs in the book. You want to, one of them, I think, was maybe when it actually if you look closely, that our Lord is in a particular shot. That,
There's a spread in here when he's arrested. Dismas and Justice are arrested, and Randy Gallegos, the illustrator, and I worked very closely on this.
That's the image we're showing right now.
Yeah, and if you look to the left there, that's Jesus and St. Peter and Andrew walking on the edge of the frame. Jesus is there, and I love the idea. Again, I talked to you about the haunting nature of the gaze of God, the grace that you encounter and didn't ask for. And he's there as well.
Right.
Dismas is unaware of him. He's passing by, but he's there. So I liked that little Easter egg, that little nod. And even if you don't think through it or cognitively accept it, you're getting it. You're receiving the image and the idea. The same thing with color scheme through the book. If you notice, when he's a younger boy, Dismas is pure and the scene is light. As he moves into his life of crime, the lights go out, and then they only come back when the Holy Family appears briefly, and then they go away.
Right.
So it's a pretty dark. We're painting in very dark hues
you would even,
in the middle.
somebody might say it's kind of dark for kids.
Yeah, the middle
family.
is.
Why would you go for that? But
Look, I think, like Will Wilder, like the Spider book, everybody always tells me, you can't portray evil. You can't go to dark places with kids or families. I completely reject that. Chesterton used to always say, our job is not to pretend that the dragon doesn't exist. Our job is to recognize the dragon and show the child how it's beaten and destroyed. The kid knows the dark side and the demon from the time he's a little boy or a little girl. They understand evil. And you have to at least recognize it and meet them on the level they're at. I think we sometimes throw daisies and sunshine at kids, and that's a deception. Life is not like that. Reality is not like that. So if you want good to come crashing in, you need to have something for it to crash in against. And I think I try to be as honest as I can with families without being gratuitous. In an imaginative way, in a winsome way. I mean, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, we paint in very dark colors for that for a Christmas book. It's in a cave. They're in a cave. But after we did it, I said, my gosh, in this COVID moment, we're all in a dark place, and we're in a cave, and we're feeling abandoned.
Really.
And yet light crashes in. Light comes in. It's there if you're looking for it. And Dismas has the same experience, the glance of God that never really leaves him.
Right. You know, it was interesting, and I don't know where I got it from, but looking at that one particular, I was thinking St. Peter looks a little like Justice, who, when he, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I was thinking,
They're both bald guys,
bald guys, kind of older fellows, and I'm thinking, here's these two people with totally different approaches to life.
Yeah. There's a lot of, this book has a lot of juxtaposition and dichotomy where we show there's often the dark and the light warring with each other. Dismas on one side, Justice, the older thief, on the other. Jesus and the guards. You see that interplay throughout the book. Our Lady Mary has a really quiet but important role in this book. She's there, very mystical. Some of that I added. There's a moment where the child Jesus grabs Dismas's finger. That is my invention, I'll admit now. But I needed a dramatic moment to underscore what was happening here, so when you come to it later, it means something and it's fuller. We know he looked at the child, he talked to the child, he was impressed by the child, but I needed some moment there. So that was the one thing I created.
Why do you think he said, and I know in one of the legend comes out about, I may ask you for mercy some later, reminded me of The Godfather or something. One day I'll come to ask you for a favor as well.
St. Augustine writes that. That's a quote from St. Augustine. And supposedly, the story goes, Dismas, the thief, comes upon this family. He's about to rob them. He's so impressed, frightened by the encounter with this child. There's something he sees there, feels there, conviction. I mean, that's what you as an author begin to play with. What does he see? What's he going through? And he tells him, look, I'm going to spare you, but if a time should come when I need your help, you're going to have to help me out too. I mean, that's what he makes a bargain with them. And it pays off at the end. We see the payoff at the end. It explains why, at least narratively. Doesn't matter if it's true or not true. The story feels right to me. And it has a completeness now to it that just seeing the last act, oh, have mercy on me, bring me into your kingdom, and you'll be with me today in paradise, that always left me kind of cold because there's no predicate for it. Now you get the predicate, and you have Mary who's part of that, and Jesus who's part of that, and the whole, we tie it together.
Seeing her, he recognizes the connection, and then he sees the, and then he recognizes the same look. The other thing was interesting on one level was the fact that he obviously fakes that he robs them, so to speak, and to buy off his pal, Justice, the other mentor, guy. Now, the only reason he could do that was because he had lied to him about the fact that he had robbed somebody else.
Just before.
Who apparently he killed, you would gather.
That's very gently implied there. But look, this guy was a highway robber, and he was known as the Prince of Death, which I do nod to in the book, and a guy who showed no mercy, which the moment I saw that, I thought, wait, there's a great story here. And that was the first thing I came upon, where he was renowned for being the Prince of Death and having no mercy. And I'm thinking, and this is the guy who grabbed the ultimate mercy from God himself and broke into the doors of heaven before Mary, the popes, saints, the apostles, anybody. He's the first guy in the gate. And I thought, this is a story. I've got to figure out what this is. And so I spent some time, I dug around, I found other sources, and then you put it in and you let it rest. It's like bread dough storytelling sometimes. You have to let it ferment and do what it's going to do.
Well, did you find also with this, maybe in a smaller way, similar to what you do with the Will Wilder books and stuff, you kind of have these characters and these people, and to some degree they start to tell their own story.
Well, they do. Will Wilder is a little more difficult, which is why book 4 is slow in coming. Because I do have to, it's a puzzle, and you do have to set the game. Once the game is set, and I know what's the crisis here, who the villain is, what the prophecy is in that particular book, what the stakes are, then the characters start to move. But that framing is the hardest part of those books, setting the arena. But once the arena's set, then you set the characters loose and they will start telling you. With books like this, I absorb all I can in research, but the form of it's set. So in some ways it's easier. Then I just have to pull out.
Well, I remember when you first worked on the Will Wilder books, you did the idea of building the binders on each character, to create that so that you made sure that you got to know them in a sense, and so that you didn't have them doing things they wouldn't naturally do.
Well, it's to keep you honest. I mean, I have Bibles on all the characters and the setting. There's an entire Perilous Falls binder, and in it are maps, descriptions of the building, who lives where. It's to keep me. I can't remember. You can't remember all the detail. Where's the hair salon? Where did they go? Where's the gaming part? I don't remember all of this. But it's to keep me honest, and it's the same thing with the characters. And they start to shift when you're writing a series. They do start to move. So I have to make notes at the end of every book and update those binders because they've now moved in a new direction that, frankly, I didn't intend. And I love when that happens because you're in that story so deeply. It's telling itself in some ways.
So in this, The Spider Who Saved Christmas, now The Thief Who Stole Heaven, both listed as a legend. Do you have other legend books you're thinking of putting out?
There are a few others, not tons of them, but I have a few others that I'm noodling around with. Like this book, The Spider Who Saved Christmas is truly a legend. A legend is a bit of history that accretions build up over time, and people start to fabulate and bend in the way Shakespeare added to Hamlet or King Lear, neither of which he created. These were existing stories that others had told, and he bent the edges, brought out character. Of course, he was the best teller of those tales, and that's why those are the only ones we remember today. Similarly here, I wanted to put my brand and mark on these legends, But The Thief Who Stole Heaven is far more history than a legend. I'm a little squeamish about calling it a legend, but they wanted to call it that.
So when you went through this, and I know, as I recall, how you came upon these was in researching Will Wilder, looking through. Yeah. So, and that's where you kind of at least got a taste of this, and then followed up on this. Why when you found this one, why was this the next one you decided to do?
Well, I really thought it fit in nicely with The Spider Who Saved Christmas. Okay. It is a prequel to the story. It's the same Holy Family. They're acting in the same way. So, being a guy who writes series now, I like to carry over characters if you can. There's something familiar and nice about that. It made this an easier book to write.
So I didn't notice, are Jesus and Mary, is the Holy Family look exactly the same as they do in both books?
Exactly.
Right.
Exactly the same. They're in the same costumes.
Right.
Joseph has the same green and white striped tunic.
Okay.
Mary's in the same blue veil, obviously. We made the decision of the blue veil. And the baby looks similar.
Right.
So, yeah, I wanted kids reading both books to say, oh, that's those people.
Right.
They've already gone on a journey with them some way.
Right. I've connected right away. I recognize who they are. Yeah. And Joseph's got a lantern.
Always the lantern. And the staff. If you notice one of these, I don't know if you may not have this spread. I love when they first meet Dismas, you notice Joseph, originally he had the staff in the ground. When I talked to Randy, I said, no, put the staff, I want it to look like he can use that staff and beat him over the head if he needed to. I like the idea that he's the defender of the family. And
well, Mother Angelica, you know better than anybody, would appreciate that instead of a lily in his hand, which she always used to complain about.
She hated the lily in the hand. Well, now with the year of St. Joseph, there are all these images. In fact, I saw one, someone gave me at the church the other day, where it's St. Joseph, the defender of against evil, and he's warding off the demons, and he's like got the staff in the back of a demon. So that's a kind of more manly, protective, assertive St. Joseph than I think we're used to seeing in art. And I was very determined that we depicted that St. Joseph, that foster father in this series. It's because I think that's probably closer to who he was than this fey kind of, spear carrier standing in the corner. It's just unreasonable to think.
Furniture
yeah, I mean, look, it's unreasonable to think if a robber comes upon your family or you go into a cave, you're going to be the first one in the door.
Absolutely.
And you're going to be ready to protect.
In that culture,
right. And that's why she checks with him. She checks with Joseph. She checks with the baby. There's an interesting, there are manners that I tried to weave in here. So if you're looking for that, it's there too.
Right, I was going to say. So in thinking about the next one that you're going to work on, what do you have the material, or would you take time? You'd have to work through it again. Do you have an outline?
I have a few notes. Yeah. They're very different from what I've done here, and it's a different moment. I like the interplay of stories you think you know, or a tale that you think you understand, and changing the perspective slightly, whether that's with the spider or the backstory of the thief, so that you look at this and stop taking it for granted. We take Easter for granted, we take the resurrection for granted, we take the birth of Jesus for granted. We take these moments for granted, and the characters that created those moments. And I want people to recognize the reality of this.
In some ways, we take the positive aspects of the Christian culture that we live in have been created for granted, and people don't realize that when they start chopping out the underpinnings of that, so goes that culture.
It all disappears. It all disappears. And that's why these stories matter. And they're not just stories to me. I think it's really important to convey, look, stories are collected wisdom that people have learned over many years. And the reason that they're contained in a story is because, as Jesus knew, as Mother Angelica employed regularly, stories are the easiest and smartest way to convey a truth. And in the case of most books, and when you think about it, all stories are really survival manuals. They're teaching us how to live. And both the Spider book, certainly the Thief book, we're all this thief. We've all made mistakes. There are people who think, I'm done. There's no more for me. I had my chance. I missed it. This story tells the opposite tale, that hope is eternal. Mercy does not fail.
So do you have a sense that there's a greater, in a sense, hunger for that even now?
Yeah. I think, look, you mentioned it earlier. We're cutting out the foundations in a lot of these traditional beliefs that people clung to, particularly in times of stress and distress. It's important, I think, to tap into why these stories and moments matter and to get people to reappraise them and what they mean to their own lives. That's really what I'm trying to do with this, and get families to explore the terrain together, not apart, but as one. And that getting that multi-generational conversation is the most important function of any of my books, and what I tried to do with all of them.
Right. Perfect tandem, The Spider Who Saved Christmas and also The Thief. Latest one, The Thief Who Stole Heaven. A legend, sort of, but definitely by Raymond Arroyo. Thank you so much, Ray. Always great to see you. The one and only, and of course, The Thief Who Stole Heaven is the title, available through our EWTN religious catalog. And I'm Doug Keck, reminding you to get it there, and we'll see you next time right here on Bookmark.